Have you ever experienced something so crippling in your life that has made you feel broken? I have. Are you someone who has a giving heart but is struggling to feel good themselves? Are you consistently putting your needs aside to take care of everyone else? If so, you're not alone. Giving starts with giving to yourself so that you are able to give of yourself to other people. Isn't it time you took back control and discovered what makes you tick? Join me in my journey and find out how you can feel better about yourself, live your best life, and share that with others. Thinking of yourself, it doesn't make you selfish. It makes you brave. I'm Nelia, and this is the Giving Starts With You podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Giving Starts With You podcast. Thank you again for tuning in every Monday for a brand new episode. I gotta say, I still have the best guests. I do. And today is no exception. I am so excited to welcome a fellow Canadian on here, Heather Conn. Hi, Heather. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come here and to talk about. Today, we're going to talk about writing as a form of healing and storytelling and get into the nitty gritty of things. So, I want to let you guys know a little bit about who Heather is anyway. So, Heather Conn, she is a writing coach for trauma memoirs and the author of her incest memoir, which is called No Letter in Your Pocket: How a Daughter Chose Love and Forgiveness to Heal from Incest. She has also written more than 50 publications and about half a dozen anthologies. She just loves helping people through writing. She's going to share today some prompts and techniques that will help us move forward and to get started on our healing journey. And there's no better way to tell and explain that to people, and the best way to do that than to tell us about her personal story. So she's come here today, and I gotta say, some of the most incredible people I meet are people who are brave enough to come here, to talk to us, to share their ups and downs. And that's what really helps us connect with our guests. So I'm so happy, and I'm so excited that you come here to do that today.
Well, I'm really happy to be here.
That's great. So I know you're in BC right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you knew exactly where I live. I'm in Barrie, Ontario. And
Mm-hmm.
you grew up, I guess, in Toronto.
Yes, I did. And ironically, I was born in Vancouver. I wasn't supposed to be. My mom had come out, I think it was her first ever flight to see my dad win an award. And I decided to be born while she was in Vancouver. And she never did get to see my dad get that award. Instead, they came back with me. So,
What an incredible story. That's amazing. Wow. You came in with a bang.
yeah.
That's great. So, Heather, on a personal human level, who are you?
Who am I? I'm a seeker, an adventurer, a writer, and someone who has just innately creative and has to use creativity in some form every day, and someone who's always looking for the hidden things behind everything and what's really going on behind in my own life and everyone else's. I don't accept things on surface levels at all, and I always look at things at a symbolic level.
That's amazing. I love it. I love curiosity and creative people, honestly. Like, I just seem to get a lot of energy from that. So, thank you. So, Heather, I know that you're a writing coach. How did this all start? How did you get into becoming a writing coach?
Well, I've been teaching in off and on for 40 years in all different capacities, from teaching full time at a college, teaching workshops, webinars, and in a lot of different genres: screenwriting, travel writing, professional writing, creative writing. I teach creative right now. creative writing right now. Last spring, I did a online course for University of King's College in Halifax that was called Writing from Pain to Power, which I really enjoyed. So the writing coaching part just seemed to evolve out of that, because I was also an editor. I still work as an editor. I edit book manuscripts and all kinds of stuff too. I've worked as an editor for publishers in the past and all kinds of other things. But so I just felt like, as an editor, you work one-on-one with authors, and I found that a lot of times there was sort of a psychological component to it, and that people want to learn more rather than just getting the manuscript back. So it just evolved into, I really like the one-on-one connection with people. So it just evolved kind of naturally. And then sometimes the students I had in classes wanted to work with me one-on-one, and so I got clients that way. And then, having written a trauma memoir of my own, I felt like I could help other people who are trying to do the same thing. So I do also coach other topics too, but trauma is the one I'm particularly, has really gives me a lot of meaning and satisfaction. So.
Is that because you know how healing it is to be able to write through that?
Well, yes, and also I know how scary it can be, because here I had already written 4 books. I'm a professional writer, and I was amazed how daunting it was even for me, because I had never written anything that was so personal, and it's like opening your diary and saying here, and you don't know how total strangers are going to respond to it. So yeah, I was actually quite surprised what came up for me doing it. So I thought, wow, if I'm having this reaction, what is it like for someone who's like never written anything before? So
There's a lot of risk to that.
absolutely.
It can be scary. Did you find that when you were writing your own personal story, it just kind of flowed out of you as opposed to the other writings?
I would say yes or no. I mean, structuring a memoir, it can be challenging in the type I was doing, because I was incorporating childhood flashbacks, and I tried a lot of different ways of where to place them, and I was moving chapters around and things like that. So the logistical part of it was challenging. But yeah, there's definitely, I mean, I think in any creative process, at some point you're in the flow. It's not like that's the perpetual state, but that's to me one of the great satisfactions of being in a creative process is you just, as if you're willing to surrender and open up, it's just incredible what can come out.
On on this podcast, we talk a lot about how we should daily give something to ourselves, which will help us become empowered, more confident, take care of ourselves so that we're able to take care of other people. Would you say that one of your biggest gifts that you gave to yourself was working through the writing and allowing yourself to write your personal story? Or would you say it's something else?
I would say at a more fundamental level, it's basically honoring my creative self and bringing a voice to it in whatever form that can be. For instance, I also do photography, and I do a process. I'm a trained facilitator in a process called soul collage, which is very powerful, and it works with symbols and images. So for me, it's really important to follow that urge. If you're feeling drawn to something, even if your logical brain is saying, look, I'm supposed to be doing X, Y, Z, but no, honoring that creative self and the fact that it will lead you to where you're meant to go, even if it doesn't make any sense to your left brain logical self. That's what I think. As soon as you surrender and open up to that process, it's phenomenal. But I know a lot of people, it can feel very scary, because it's literally out of control, and we're all trained to, we're supposed to know everything ahead of time. And even with the writing process, we're told in school, you should always have the outline done first and all that stuff. And I mean, that's one way of approaching things, but it's certainly not the only one, that's for sure.
I love that you push that comfort envelope. It's awesome. It makes things so much more interesting. I always say, quote unquote, normal people are boring.
Well,
So,
it's interesting because for years, like I'm really into the wild mind process that Natalie Goldberg talks about, which is about basically just stream of conscious writing. Give yourself timed exercise, maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, and just write whatever comes out and don't censor yourself. And it's a really empowering process if you let yourself go with it. And it's interesting because I've had students that you can see the resistance comes up because, for instance, somebody's might have just finished a PhD thesis and they're so used to having everything all structured and on top of it all. And then they're kind of pushing back, but then you see them let go and be open to it. And then they see what comes out. And it's just that too is very fulfilling just to see somebody. It's like watching somebody's eyes light up. They've just discovered something new, and they're often amazed at what comes up themselves too, because I really believe it connects us with the subconscious, and it can be your deeper, much wiser self can pop out on the page with something that they might not have even have thought of since they were 5 years old or something.
sounds like a definite growth process.
Hmm.
What would you tell a student or even just someone who's interested in the writing process, how to get through those times where they're afraid to write the truth? Like, how do you get through that?
Well, I that's where I think that wild mind process can be handy. Like you, if it's something from childhood, you can just start with an opening sentence like I remember, and then just write whatever comes up. I remember, keep repeating I remember, I remember. And then you can also do, just to mix it up a little bit, you can do I do not remember. Like if you do the opposite, because
Oh,
that's your mind is not used to thinking in those terms, and that can really bring things up too. So that, and I would just say always honoring something at any given time. And if you're feeling more drawn to something, go with that. Because I think the issue, some people get caught up in the fact that because they've read an article that some famous writer has done their process this way, then they think that's the way they have to do it too. And I always reinforce to people, students and clients, look, honor your own process, whatever works for you. I mean, here's some suggestions, but it really comes down to what works for you.
yeah. If we put everybody in a box, all the writing is going to kind of sound really robotic after a while. So I love that you do that. So here's an example. My brother and I obviously grew up in the same household, but we remember things in very different ways. So it, I feel like it doesn't matter how other people remember things, but be true. Don't try to cover up or change things just to make it easier for people to read, or perhaps have to prove that this is your story, because you do remember things in different ways. And in
Mhm.
my case, that is the way that it happened. Do you find that people struggle with that a lot?
Oh, absolutely, because everybody's looking for reinforcement, validation, and approval. And, I always keep saying, look, no one else except you has had your experience. No one else can tell you that your experience is wrong because that's your own experience. And it's actually very normal to have different members of the family remember something differently. I mean, that's a pretty standard thing. But yeah, it is really about honoring your own process, and especially depending on what this topic is, a family is going to usually sort of double down. If you're writing on something that's going to be revealing a skeleton in the closet, it's pretty normal for other family members to double down and try to make
Mm,
you be wrong or shame you or something. And that's when your courage has to really come to the fore, and really honor your own truth and your own story. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of courage.
absolutely. But it's more like the more of a challenge it is, the more proud you are at the end of it.
Oh, absolutely. And it also, there's a real gift in getting the story out of your body. I mean, people can sit on something for years or their whole lifetime, and in some way it's eating away at you. And to just get it physically out onto the page or on the screen or whatever, that's why I like the term crossing the threshold.
Mhm.
crossed a threshold. It's taking it from the invisible, if you want to call it dark realm, out into to the light. And that's a huge gift. I mean, even if you chose to not end up doing anything with it, just the fact that you've brought a voice to it for the first time is a really empowering step.
Mm. Yeah, that's another reason I think that it's important to work with somebody like you, because it can be a scary place and you can create a safe space for them to share.
Oh, absolutely. And I share my own experiences and the challenges that I had, so then they can realize it's not just them, because that can be an easy tendency to think, oh, this must be just me. And any writing, because it tends to be a solitary pursuit, it's easy to feel as if you're in a void. I mean, you can be in a writer's group, but if somebody hasn't been, like, our society is not trauma informed in general, for instance, and if you're in a writers group and they don't understand trauma, that can be disturbing too. I actually had somebody in one of my classes had gone to a writers group, and she had broken down and started crying when she was reading the things she wrote. And I can't believe this still. The leader of the group basically said she wasn't welcome to come back to the group. And I just thought, wow, that that is amazing to me. So yeah,
That's
you
terrible.
yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree with me, but for me, I feel like when you're writing a memoir, whether it's trauma related or different, um, it is as much for the writer as it is for the reader.
Yeah, I mean, they say you've got to write for yourself first. I would say that's the first thing. I mean, the when I was writing my story, I kept questioning sometimes whether is this keeping me too stuck in the past, like maybe this is not healthy to be doing this. I would put it away for long periods of time and then pull it out. But then, I mean, what kept me going was I thought if even one person who's had a similar experience reads this and this helps them in some way. Because at one point, I mean, I was suicidal, and I just thought, I really want to show people, look, you can go through hell and come out the other side. And that was in my lowest points. That might sound grandiose, but that's what was keeping me going.
Yay, Heather. Thank you. So, Heather, can you share your book with us? Tell us your story.
Well, it was originally supposed to cover a 20-year period, and then it just kept expanding. It starts with the death of my father, and I was there when he died. I was just him and I in the room, and towards the end anyway. And then it jumps back to me traveling in India when I was in my early 30s. I traveled with my father initially for a month, and while that happened, some things happened that jarred me back to my childhood. I had had these childhood memories, but it was like I didn't really want to believe them. That's quite a common thing that people, abuse survivors, tend to sort of repress or just not give weight to their memories. And so some of the things happened that triggered those again. And then I had a lot of sexual harassment happen to me when I was traveling alone in India, and that brought things up to the fore too. And so I really started realizing, wow, I can't just ignore this anymore. I don't want to ignore this anymore. So when I got home, that's when I really started my whole healing process. I started working on the book, and believe it or not, initially I wasn't even going to write about the incest, but then it was just like, how can I not write this? So I ended up working with a therapist and just doing a lot of stuff and opening up to it, and I could talk about that, and then I fell in love and ended up getting married, and then my husband died, and going through all of that, and then the death of my dad and my mom, and just all these things. But it just it's basically a trip through my own healing. And the thing that I found when I read a lot of incest memoirs, they seem to me to jump from, okay, here's these horrible things happening, And then now here I am, I'm this happy, healthy adult, but I would want to know, yeah, but how did you get from there to there? So I really want, in any storytelling, the middle part is where the complications and sort of the nitty gritty are. So that's why in my book, I really want to show all the different things that I went through, like dealing with my anger. And I'm a very spiritual person, so I was wanting to make my spiritual beliefs shape how I respond to the situation. Like I chose to forgive my father, although that didn't come naturally at all. It took me probably 20 years. I mean, initially I forgave him, but I realized it was just a abstract intellectual exercise. I wanted to really own it and in my body. And even that stance has prompted a lot of controversy amongst people I know. I actually lost one friend over it because it's not, we tend to live in a society where we want to punish people and that people are evil monsters. And I was trying to seek understanding, and that's not a stance that everybody approves of. So then I had to deal with all the kickbacks, well, not kickbacks, I can't think of the word, but anyway, the reactions to that. So even from publishers, I was amazed that publishers felt like as soon as you put your life on the page, they think that they can give you like free Freudian analysis. Like one publisher told me they thought I was motivated by vengeance. And oh yeah, it was just, it's amazing. Amazing. But,
Really?
yeah.
Wow, that surprises me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, I know the one thing that really shocked me was I learned that the blame the victim stance is much more entrenched in our society than I thought, even among so-called educated,
Hmm.
I was shocked. That really shocked me.
Hmm. If you didn't have writing as a way of telling your story, and if you didn't have writing as a way of, expressing your creativity, what do you think you would be doing? I love this soul collage, by the way. I need to know
Yeah,
more
well,
about that.
I was just going to say that. I mean, it was a huge healing resource for me, and I do mention it in the book. And I'm actually working on a short video to help promote my book, and it's going to include some of the soul collage cards I made through my healing. But it's a tremendous process. It was started by a woman in the States, Sina Frost, and it's based on Jungian therapy. And the idea is that all aspects of ourselves serve us in some way. Like we tend to want to push away and resist and sort of demonize the parts of ourselves that we don't like. But this actually says, no, they are serving you. They're helping you. Embrace them. And so when I was in low times, even when I didn't feel like writing, I might have felt a lot overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. I could just make a soul collage card. It's a five by night 5x9 card, and that those images would reflect how I was feeling. It's kind of like doing dream work. I mean, you might not even know what it means at the time. And then also it works with archetypal influences. For instance, if I want to draw more compassion or forgiveness into my life, I could create a forgiveness card or create a compassion card. And I did that for while I was in my healing. And then I also created some very, very dark cards, but it almost, to me, I feel like it helps because again, you're getting it out of your body, you're putting it out in a visual way. And soul collage does not use words at all, it's only visuals. So for me, I felt that was a good balance to, after being so immersed in words. So I really love that process. And there are now, I'm a trained facilitator in it, and there are now facilitators all around the world actually.
I'm intrigued.
And photography, I also have done photography for a long time, and that's been a great help too.
It sounds like between the books and the collages and the photography, you're really just really passionate about capturing things and communicating them.
Yes, and I one sort of theme that's always held through my life, and I use the metaphor of the emperor's clothing, that children's story. I've always been that kid that wants to say the emperor is not wearing any clothes. Like that's, I've always wanted to reveal the truth behind the facade, and that's something that keeps me going. That's definitely a recurring theme in my life.
Mm. And I'm sure you have some kickback sometimes for it too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, people do not want to have you burst the bubble, that's for sure. And that's one of the things that have found with this story I've written because, and you see, I watch a lot of true crime shows, and it's the same thing. Our minds seem to not be able to accept that two opposite things can exist in the same human. Like they'll say, oh, well, so and so, so such a lovely neighbor, or he's so good with the kids, or whatever. So then they think, how could he go out and murder his wife? Like those two things do not, the cognitive dissonance we are not very good at. And that's what I had to deal with in my own self. And that's what the book is about too, is how do you integrate love and abuse in your own life? Because I loved my father. And so it's really hard. It was very hard for me to bring those things together, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that you did have to go through all of that. And I'm intrigued by the title of the book.
Hmm.
You probably don't want to give it away because it might explain it in the story, but no letter in your pocket. So I keep thinking, every time I look at that title, I keep thinking, what does that mean? But I'm sure it's in the story and you don't want to give it away. But can you tell us anything about where the title came from?
Oh yeah, I'll mention a little bit about it. It does refer to a letter that I wrote to my father after he had died, and I actually include the letter at the very end of the book, and
Mm,
it's one of the things that is prompts real strong response from people too, because it's like I'm telling him I honor the pure part of you, that child part of you, while I don't ignore what you did. And I think some people think I'm being too easy on him or something. I don't know. But anyway, it came out totally spontaneously. I did not, that's exactly how it came out. And one of my readers said something like, oh, this is not believable or something. And meanwhile, I thought, well, hey, that's reality. That's exactly what I wrote. That's how it came out. So anyway, so I put it down on the page.
it's interesting to me why people think people would make up this stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like it just doesn't make sense. And those aren't, it's okay because those aren't the people that are needing to read it anyway.
Well, I just, again, I think it goes back to that cognitive dissonance thing. People don't have a place to put this in their own brain. Like, especially if you haven't dealt with your own wound, you're going to project. I tell my students that too. Everybody's going to project their own wound onto what you're writing. So that's why you have to be really clear about your meaning and what, because you don't have control over what somebody's going to project onto your words. So you've got to try to make them as clear as you can.
Hmm. I'm just curious. Do you ever have clients who ask you if it's okay to ask for permission from certain people mentioned in their story? Because
Oh, definitely.
okay.
That's absolutely been one. In fact, that's one of the issues I covered in the both in the webinar I did and in the class I did last spring, because that is an important consideration. Absolutely. So I mean, as much as possible in general, you'd want to try to use people's real names. But in my book, I don't. I actually, one of the men I was involved with at the time, he actually said, oh, don't use my real name. And I actually never named my father in the book, although anybody who knows who's from Toronto will know who it was. But I also made the choice that I didn't want the book to come out until after he had died. That was a very conscious decision. But yeah, everybody, I would say there's a lot of legal things involved, and I don't want to get into all the nitty gritty of that. But yeah, just to feel safer, I would suggest changing names and some of the maybe defining characteristic of somebody. That's a pretty common thing to do in our genre of creative nonfiction, which is what mine is. I have a master's in that. That's what I was teaching.
Hmm. I talked to a publisher once and he said, well, memoirs don't sell. And I kind of looked at him and I said, well, they do, but let's look at why we're writing this, right? So there's people write memoirs for lots of different reasons. I think money is really at the bottom of that list. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to anything in publishing, money should not be your motivation. If it is, you're going to be awfully disappointed unless you're a huge celebrity or something, because publishing is definitely not the field to be in if you're trying to make the big bucks. Absolutely. So, yeah, no, in fact, I had a US agent tell me, oh, nobody's interested in incest. Write about your India travels. And then I had another one who wanted me to rewrite the whole book like a novel and, all different things. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. So you've already mentioned in our conversation that you have a couple of tools. So one of them was the timing. And I've used that myself when people call it writer's block or I'm stuck or whatever it is and it actually works.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you just don't feel like writing that day or whatever it is. But once you get started, it's hard to stop.
Well, and I would also say be open to, because I believe that your deeper self is always wanting to come out and find a voice, and it's our logical controlling brains that keep it tamped down. And I would say, like, be honor and trust what comes out on the page, even if it takes you in a direction that is not where you want to go. For instance, with one of my first kids book, I was in India working on a screenplay, and I kept getting this goldfish voice coming to me, and it seemed to be like in a kid's voice, and it was very insistent, and it seemed to be coming from a deep place. So I thought, okay, I'll listen to that. So, and the message I was seemed to be getting about it was about letting go, the concept of letting go. So I decided to write book for kids about the concept of letting go. And I didn't know anything about writing for children. I had never planned to do that at all. And so then I did, and then I end up doing another one too. And when I look back in retrospect, I think subconsciously I was working through my relationship with my father in the first book, and then with the relationship with my mom in the next book. But anyway, that opened up a whole field for me that I had never had any intentions to be in. So,
That's interesting.
and the other thing someone can do too, which I find, is you can ask a question with your non-dominant hand and then answer it with the hand you normally write with. And the premise of that is that writing with your non-dominant hand also connects you with your subconscious or your deeper self, and that's an interesting process too.
Hmm. And I love when you said write down, I remember or I don't remember. It sounds so simple, but when you said that, I'm like, I could do that right now and it would be like easy. I could do it. It would be easy. I would get my feeling out. Sometimes we're so caught up in using the right words. To me, it's more important to get the emotion across, especially when you're talking about trauma or a memoir, a personal story, anything like that. I think if you can make the reader feel what you feel and not feel like, you know, that they're not alone in their struggle, I think you've already won.
Oh, absolutely. The emotional component is huge. And I tell people that, when you're creating descriptions for an atmosphere of somewhere on the page, it's totally up to you by the words you choose, what kind of atmosphere you're going to create, what kind of mood or emotional response you want from the reader. And I've actually given the exercise where I've put some object on the table, and then I'll have them do an exercise that I want you to write about as if this was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in the world. And then after they do that, then they write about the exact same thing, that this is the most horrific thing you've
Mm,
ever seen in the world. So it's the same object, but it's all about how the words they choose to describe it.
great exercise. I love that. So, in addition to using the timing and using the I remember, is there anything else that you think might help people along in their writing journal?
Well, I'm a real fan advocate of keeping a pen and paper next to your bed and just jotting stuff down, because it's easy for the mind to say, "Oh, that's not important," or "I'll remember tomorrow morning," or something. But no, have it all in one place, because again, that's telling yourself that you're taking it seriously. And even if you suddenly wake up at 3 in the morning and it's dark, I would still say write it down, get it down there. That really helps.
You know what I did once is, oh, I got feedback here. What I did once was I had my phone and it was like middle of the night and I wanted to write something down, even if it's not for writing a book, but I wanted to remember something. I just get out my recorder on my phone and I'll just speak into it because I'm like, oh, I'm too tired to get a pen and a paper. And I go back to it and I'm like, I don't know what kind of words I used, but I know exactly what I wanted to say. And then just take out the pen and paper. So I was telling you, so I wrote a memoir a couple of years ago about my father dying and how it changed my life. And it was all done on scrap pieces of paper and
Mm-hmm.
interviewing him before he passed away. And I had to collect all these papers, and some of them were written in pencil. So I kind of had to like hold it up to the light and see what you know. So as long as it gets out when you need it to get out. And like you said that you took a long time to write it. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard because when
Yeah,
you're emotionally invested as opposed to writing a novel,
yeah,
things come up. It's tough. It's okay to put it
absolutely.
down. Mhm.
I know, I laugh now because when I was doing my master's, I asked one of my profs, how long do you think that this will take me to write? And she said 4 years. And to me at that time, that seemed like an eternity. And meanwhile, it took a lot longer than that. But then again, I just felt like, it has its own time frame. Like you can't force something into being before it's meant to be. Like I said, I kept adding on to it because I felt like my husband's death was relevant to everything, and then including my mom's death. So the time frame just kept expanding, and then I actually ended up incorporating some of the responses I was getting from
Mm,
publishers and readers and stuff too. So
interesting. Hmm. So I know you do other, you said other subjects besides trauma memoirs. Would you say that if somebody's writing a novel where it's not like a true story, do you think then, yes, it's easier to have a deadline because things won't come up? It's not a personal story. Like it's okay, I'm going to write, 10,000 words this week. You can kind of space it out. Whereas when it's a memoir and something personal, you have to kind of give yourself permission to be free and give yourself more time, right?
well, I don't know. I mean, I think a novel can be tough too because sometimes people make the choice. In fact, I have a student right now. Sometimes people make the choice of they want to write a novel about something that happened for real, but they don't feel like that nonfiction, they can't go that's too risky, too vulnerable to do it in nonfiction. Maybe they don't like that genre, so they're going to do it as a novel, but that doesn't mean that you're still not, if you're writing about things that happen or drawing on your own experience, you're still going to have responses. So yeah, I don't think writing fiction is necessarily makes it easier, but yeah, there is less revelation, direct revelation that way. So I mean, for the kids'
Mhm.
books, I wasn't writing about myself, so I can't answer that. I'm really immersed in creative nonfiction. So
No, that's great. Wow, I can really see even non-writers that are listening that and they think, "Oh, I could never write." If you have a story, and we all have a story, sometimes we're like, "Oh, I don't have an interesting story. Who's going to want to read that?" But we all have a story that may help someone else. Whether you decide to publish it or not, write it. Write it down, share it with yourself, even if you don't want to share it with anybody else. Because whether it's a celebrating story or a very dark story, I think it will help you grow and move forward in your life and you'll learn about yourself.
yeah, I totally agree. And it's like what I said, it's crossing a threshold. And that's if you look at the sort of the aspect of the hero's journey and all the different steps along the way, I mean, that's an important step. You're taking something from the unknown without a voice and bringing it out into the light and giving it a voice. And that's huge, even if you end up being the only one who reads it. And early on, when I was just reading excerpts of my book, years ago in my own community, I was surprised at the people who came up to me afterwards and said, I had the same experience. And these are people I've known or might have known for over a decade, and I had no idea. Like if I hadn't brought that issue up, they would never have known that. In my meditation class, there was only about a dozen of us, and I brought that up one time and made that the theme. And it turns out that a third of the people in our meditation group had all either directly been experienced incest or had their grandchildren or something be affected by it. So I really feel like it's a subject that's still in the closet, so to speak, to some degree, because we have a view that the family is just such a sanctified, sacred thing to speak out against it or bring it out into the light is something that, most people don't want to know, especially if it's ruining the image that somebody had of someone. I mean, it was hard enough for me to deal with that. So I understand people not wanting to deal with that, because it's not easy, but I think it's really important. I feel like that's a big part of what a writer's job is, to bring a voice to things that, taking the personal and making it universal, to give a voice to the things that other people are experiencing but might not want to actually ever share with anyone.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I think we need that little push to make us get started, because it is scary. And most things in life that move us forward are scary.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the whole yin yang thing. You can't have the light without the darkness. If you're not willing to go the darkness, then I love the Buddhist metaphor of the lotus flower, that its roots are down in the muck and you can't see them. And that's what creates the beautiful flower. And if you just focus on the beautiful flower, you're not seeing all that so-called crap. And Natalie Goldberg uses that term too when she's talking about that wild mind process. She calls it composting. You've got to churn out all that crap and get up there in order to get that maybe one little piece of gold that's in there.
Well, you've taught me some things today. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything we didn't talk about today that you would like to talk about with people who are even interested in trying this? Like, there's just so many gifts in it.
Well, I just want to say, unfortunately, in our society, we get conditioned to think that unless we're somebody famous, nobody's going to be interested in our story. And that's not true at all. Like I said, even says on my business card, we all have a story. What's yours? So I would just say, start wherever you want to start. It can be with an image, it can be with one line. And the more you open up to that and trust it, then it'll just start flowing. I really believe that. So I was going to mention, if anybody, since you're in Barrie, I don't know where all your listeners are, but I'm actually going to be doing the launch for my memoir on May 28th in Toronto. It's going to be 8 of us from the publisher Guernica Editions, and it's going to be at 3:30 at the Supermarket Bar in Kensington, which is down in downtown Toronto. So.
I love Kensington. I used to work in a recording studio down there. I'm a recording engineer by trade.
Oh, yeah.
Long time ago. Yeah. And I love that. What day of the week is May 28th?
It's a Sunday.
Ooh, I may just make it.
Sunday afternoon at 3:30.
It's my birthday weekend. Yes.
Well, and ironically, I didn't set that date, the publisher did, and yet the next day would be the anniversary of my father's birthday, and then the May 30th is the anniversary of my husband's death. So I just thought it's interesting the timing of when that is too.
There's that spiritual talking to us again, right? Wow. Yes, please send me the information on that. I would love to attend. That would be amazing.
Well, they haven't. I think they're just doing up the flyers now, but when I get one, I'll send it to you. Thanks.
Thank you. I would love that very much. And, guys, check out her website, heatherconn.com, and we're going to put all the links to her books. We're going to put links to her. She's got a video on her website. Check out all of the different things that she does. And it is a pleasure to have met you today. And thank you for coming here and making everybody feel, that they can do this, that it doesn't have to be as scary as you think it's going to be. And whether or not people like it, that's not the reason you're writing it.
Yeah, write for yourself first. That's what they always say. So,
I love that. I love that.
well, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed that. You're a great interviewer.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm serious. I'm not just, as they say, blowing smoke up your ass. I'm totally serious about that. So,
Oh, thank you. It's funny because, I'm actually a pretty quiet person, but when I talk about things that I love and I'm passionate about, then the little bit of extrovert comes more out. But I love to read and I love to write and I love sharing stories. And that's why I really wanted to invite you on here because I think that it's going to help people that are listening. And I think people need to set time aside for themselves. We could all say, oh my goodness, I don't have time to write a book. Who has time to listen to my sad story or any of these things? And I can tell you from the before I wrote the book to after I wrote my book, my life has changed.
mhm,
And I understand myself better. And I understand the world views a little bit better. And your life has changed so much before and after all of the things that you have written. And it's an adventure. It's pretty awesome. So, and you'll be proud of it when you're finished. And it's okay to be a little bit scared. And what doesn't have risks? What
exactly.
doesn't have risks? But giving voice to the voiceless, I say that a lot when it comes to helping people around the world in a different way. But through writing, I never thought of it that way, but it's absolutely doing that. Absolutely.
Well, and on Netflix, Brene Brown has a video
Yes.
called, I think it's called The Call of Courage, and she talks about how you can't have courage without vulnerability. Like a lot of people think those are two opposing things, but they're not. They're synonymous. So, but again, our culture doesn't teach us that. It teaches us that vulnerability is a weakness, but it isn't. To truly open up to yourself and allow yourself to be visible and vulnerable is it's hugely empowering, but yeah, it's also scary too, but it's great.
But maybe the culture will change if more and more of us stand up.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you, Heather, so much. Please keep in touch and do send me that flyer because I'd love to meet you in person.
I
And
will.
that would be such a fun day. Absolutely.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, thank you. And I will read your book and I will give you my thoughts.
Oh,
Not that my thoughts matter at all
oh, sure they
when it
do.
comes to it, but I won't be judging you. Don't worry. I'm not like those publishers you had mentioned who are trying to analyze you and therapy you through this book.
Well, I invite people to put comments on after they've read it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, all that, because that really helps with the sales of books too. So,
Yeah, and the more we get the message out and share with people, not just for the sales, but more people can hear the story, more people will be inspired to write their own. And yeah, we need to help each other out.
yeah,
We all have dark sides and bright sides and
yeah.
or we should. And if we don't admit it, then I think we're lying about it. But we all have these sides to ourselves and it kind of makes us interesting. So thank you so much, Heather, and I hope
Oh,
you have
thank
a
you.
fabulous day.
Oh, you too. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe or leave a review. See you next week on the Giving Starts With You podcast.